An 11-year-old cut a chain and unleashed an unstoppable force. What began as a simple act of right and wrong would bring 1,000 outlaws rolling into town. This isn't a story of violence. It's a story of power, community, and a shocking stand that would redefine them all. If you're new here, subscribe and comment your location. Now let's begin. The sun was barely up over Pine Creek County, but 11-year-old Daniel was already dragging his feet through the dusty woods. His civics class had a project: follow the path of a vote, from a person's home to the polling station to the ballot box. It sounded boring, but his teacher, Mr. Davies, said it was important. The vote is a sacred right, Daniel, he'd said. People fought for it. Sometimes people still try to take it away. Daniel didn't really get it. Not until he saw the chain. It was a thick, heavy thing, pulled tight across the old logging road. The road was the only way for people in the Maple Ridge Mobile Home Park to get to their polling place at the old community hall. The chain was new. A bright, shiny padlock held it to a post. A sign hung from it, red letters on white: private property, no TSPSSING, VIOLATOIS will be towed. Daniel stopped. He remembered the map. This was the public right-of-way. He'd checked it last night. This was wrong. He heard a car engine sputter and die. An old sedan was coming down the hill from Maple Ridge. It stopped at the chain. An elderly man, Mr. Henderson, got out. He stared at the chain, his shoulders slumping. He looked at the thick woods on either side of the road. He was too old to walk through that. He got back in his car and slowly reversed back up the hill. A hot, angry feeling bubbled in Daniel's stomach. This was what Mr. Davies meant. Someone was trying to take the vote away. Without really thinking, Daniel ran back to his house. He went straight to the garage and got his dad's big bolt cutters. They were heavy, but he carried them back into the woods. He looked around. No one was there. The woods were quiet. He lifted the bolt cutters. The metal jaws fit over the chain link. He squeezed with all his might. His arms shook. Nothing happened. He took a deep breath, adjusted his grip, and threw his whole weight onto the handles. Snap! The sound was shockingly loud in the quiet morning. The chain fell away, one end coiling on the dirt like a dead snake. Daniel felt a jolt of panic. What had he done? He hid the bolt cutters in some bushes and ran home, his heart pounding. At the same time, 40 miles away in a large, fenced compound, a man named Mark was drinking coffee. Mark wasn't his real name, but it was the one he used most. He was the president of the Pine Creek Charter of the Hells Angels. He was a big man, with a beard going gray and eyes that had seen too much. The compound was quiet, just the low rumble of a few bikes being worked on. His phone rang. It was Mercy, who lived up at Maple Ridge with her son, James. Mercy's voice was tight with anger. "They've chained off the road, Mark, the voting road. Old man Henderson just called me. He couldn't get through." Mark put his coffee down slowly. Who? Who do you think? County Commissioner Griffin's boys. He's up for re-election. He knows our community, and every other soul up here on the ridge votes for his opponent. He's blocking the road. Mark's face went very still. The Hells Angels were many things: outlaws, businessmen, a family. They were also a voting bloc. In Pine Creek, they kept to themselves, but they voted together. It was a quiet kind of power, and someone was trying to steal it. "All right," Mark said, his voice a low rumble. "I'll handle it." He didn't call the police. He knew where Police Chief Donnelly's loyalties lay with Griffin. He walked out of his house into the compound. He nodded to a huge man named Paul who was polishing his bike. "Paul, round up the boys, all of them. We're going for a ride." Paul looked up. "A ride where?" "To vote," Mark said. It started with a dozen bikes leaving the compound. Then those riders made calls. From bars, from garages, from homes across 3 counties they came. They wore their colors, the winged death's head on their backs. They were young and old, men and a few women. They rumbled through small towns, turning heads. The group swelled to 50, then 100, then more. By the time the main column turned onto the state highway leading towards Pine Creek, they were a river of chrome and denim, 1,000 strong. The sound was like continuous thunder. Daniel was back at the community hall polling station with his mom, Jennifer. He was nervous, expecting a sheriff to come arrest him any second for cutting the chain. But instead, he heard it first, a distant rumble that grew and grew. The two volunteer poll workers, Lucy and Rose, looked up from their table. A few early voters in line turned their heads. Then they saw them. The first motorcycles appeared over the crest of the hill, then more and more, an endless line of them. They rolled into the small gravel parking lot in a precise, deafening procession, the air filled with the smell of exhaust and oil. The bikes parked in orderly rows, the riders cut their engines. The sudden silence was more terrifying than the noise. 1,000 Hell's Angels dismounted. They were big, bearded, tattooed. They wore their patches like armor. They looked around, their expressions unreadable behind sunglasses. Mark stepped forward. He took off his sunglasses. He walked towards the polling station door. The small crowd of regular voters parted like a wave. Lucy, the head poll worker, a frail woman in her 70s, stood up, her chin trembling but held high. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady. Mark stopped. He looked at the sign that said polling place. He looked back at his men, a sea of leather and solidarity. Then he looked at Lucy. "We are here to vote, ma'am," he said, his voice quiet but carrying in the stillness. A ripple went through the crowd. Daniel stared, his mouth open. "Well," Lucy said, blinking. "Well then, you'll have to get in line, and I'll need to see your ID and voter registration cards." Mark almost smiled. He reached into his cut-off vest and pulled out a worn wallet. He produced a driver's license and a voter registration card. "Yes, ma'am." He turned and nodded to Paul. Paul nodded to the others, and without a word, the 1,000 Hell's Angels formed a single, long, snaking line. It started at the door of the community hall, went across the parking lot, and disappeared down the side road. They stood, arms crossed, perfectly still. A silent, intimidating wall of humanity. The message was clear: this voting place is open for everyone. News travels fast. Within an hour, local news vans arrived, then national ones. Reporters stood a safe distance away, cameras zooming in on the unbelievable scene, the most notorious motorcycle club in the world, standing peacefully in line to vote. Commissioner Griffin arrived in a sleek county SUV, his face purple with rage. He stormed up to Mark, who was now near the front of the line. Chief Donnelly was with him, looking nervous. "This is intimidation," Griffin shouted, pointing a finger at Mark. "You can't do this. This is a blockade." Mark looked down at the finger, then slowly back at Griffin's face. "We're in line, Commissioner, just like any other citizen. We're exercising our civic duty. Is there a problem?" "You're scaring people. No one will come vote with you here." As if on cue, a car pulled up. It was Mr. Henderson from Maple Ridge. He got out, gave the long line of bikers a wide-eyed look, then saw the chain was gone. He smiled, nodded at Mark, and got in line behind a biker named Tiny, who was 6'5" and covered in skull tattoos. Tiny gave him a slight nod. "Seems okay to me," Mr. Henderson said loudly. Griffin sputtered. He turned to Chief Donnelly. "Arrest them for trespassing for that chain." Donnelly stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Mark, you know I gotta ask, the chain on the logging road, it was cut. You know anything about that?" Before Mark could answer, a small voice piped up. "I did it." Everyone turned. Daniel stepped forward from behind his mom, his face pale but determined. "I cut the chain. It was on the public right-of-way. It was illegal. My teacher said the vote is sacred, so I cut it." A profound silence fell. Mark looked at the small boy, then at Griffin. A slow, cold smile spread across Mark's face. He looked back at Chief Donnelly. "You gonna arrest an 11-year-old boy for civic engagement, Chief, while the man who ordered the illegal chain stands right here." The cameras zoomed in on Griffin's furious, trapped face. Donnelly looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. "No," the chief muttered. "No, I'm not." He walked away. Griffin, defeated and humiliated on national television, got back in his SUV and sped off, spraying gravel. The day wore on. The line never got shorter. As one biker voted and left, another took his place, keeping the line at a steady 1,000 strong. It became a strange, peaceful festival. Local supporters from Maple Ridge, seeing the news, started showing up with coffee and sandwiches for the bikers. The bikers, in turn, were quietly polite. They said, "Please and thank you, ma'am." They made space for elderly voters. They let mothers with young children go ahead of them. Daniel sat on the steps, watching it all. Mark came over and sat down heavily next to him, taking a break from the line. "That was a brave thing you did, kid," Mark said, his voice softer now. "I was scared," Daniel admitted. "Brave doesn't mean you're not scared," Mark said. "It means you do it anyway. You started all this." He gestured to the incredible scene around them. "Are you really gonna stay all day?" Daniel asked. "Until every last one of my brothers and sisters has voted, and until every person from Maple Ridge has voted, and until the polls close." Mark looked out at the line. People see the patches, the bikes, the tattoos. They think they know what we are. Today isn't about changing that. Today is about showing that what we are includes this, our community, our vote. There was a charged moment near the snack table. A biker named James, Mercy's son, was getting a coffee. The woman handing them out was Rita, a teacher from the next town over. She was beautiful, with kind eyes and a smart mouth. She'd been watching him all afternoon. "You take it black?" Rita asked, holding out a cup. James nodded. "Thanks." "You've been here 6 hours," she said. "Got a few more to go." Their fingers brushed as she handed him the cup. A spark. He held her gaze for a second too long. She smiled, a little flustered. "It's a hell of a thing you're all doing." "It's the right thing," James said simply. He didn't move away. The world around them, the cameras, the crowd, the bikes seemed to fade for a second. It was just them, a simple, electric connection in the middle of the madness. He finally nodded and walked back to his place in line, feeling her eyes on his back. As afternoon turned to evening, the tension shifted. Griffin wasn't done. He couldn't fight the Angels directly, so he tried to cheat the system. He sent county workers to check the voting machines, a transparent attempt to slow everything down. The line inside the hall stalled. Mark saw it from outside. He made a phone call. 15 minutes later, 3 black SUVs pulled up. Out stepped a man in an impeccable suit. David. He wasn't a biker. He was a lawyer, the club's lawyer. He walked into the polling place, followed by 2 serious-looking associates. "I am counsel for the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club," David announced, his voice smooth and cutting. "My clients have reason to believe you are intentionally impeding the voting process. I am here to observe. Any further machine checks will be met with an immediate federal lawsuit for voter suppression. Do I make myself clear?" The county workers looked at David, then at the wall of bikers visible through the window. They packed up their tools and left without a word. The lines started moving again. The romance between subplots continued. Rita brought James a fresh coffee as the sun set. "You're still here." "Told you I would be," James said. He sipped the coffee. "You make good coffee." "It's just coffee," she laughed. "Not when you make it," he said. It was a cheesy line, but from him, with his serious eyes, it felt real. She blushed. He scribbled something on a napkin and handed it to her. It was his phone number. "When this is over, maybe I could take you for a ride. The quiet kind, in a car." She took the napkin, her heart beating fast. "I'd like that." Polls closed at 8 p.m. The last voter in line was a young biker named Leo. He cast his ballot at 8:02 under the strict observation of the lawyers. As he walked out, a cheer went up, not a raucous biker yell, but a deep, respectful rumble of approval from the 1,000 brothers and sisters who had stayed until the end. The job was done. They had voted. More importantly, their presence had ensured that everyone in Pine Creek County who wanted to vote could vote. The national news anchors were already calling it the Pine Creek Stand, a stunning display of raw civic power. The bikers mounted their bikes. The thunder started again, but this time it was the sound of departure. They kicked their engines to life, one after another, a rolling wave of sound. Mark stood by his bike, looking at the now dark community hall. Daniel walked up to him. "Thank you," Daniel said. Mark shook his head. "No, son, thank you. He reached into his vest and pulled out a small, worn patch. It wasn't a club patch. It was a simple embroidered patch of an eagle. "For courage," Mark said, handing it to Daniel. "You earned it." Daniel took it, holding it like it was made of gold. Mark put on his sunglasses, swung a leg over his bike, and kicked it over. He led the column out of the parking lot. The 1,000 headlights cut through the night, a river of light rolling back towards their compound, their empire, their world. They hadn't changed who they were. They had simply shown one more facet of it. They were outlaws, and today they were the guardians of the vote. The news would talk about it for weeks. The election results came in. Griffin lost in a historic landslide. The club's chosen candidate won, and in a small apartment a week later, James picked up Rita for their first date, driving a surprisingly clean and quiet sedan. Back in his room, Daniel pinned the eagle patch to his backpack. He would never look at civics the same way again. Power wasn't just in a government building. Sometimes it roared up on 1,000 Harley-Davidsons, stood silently in line for hours, and reminded everyone what a right really meant. The roar of the engines faded into the night, but the quiet in Pine Creek was different now. It was a charged, waiting quiet. In his living room, Commissioner Griffin stared at the TV, watching the news anchors replay the footage of him yelling at Mark, of Daniel confessing, of the endless line of bikers. His phone started ringing. He didn't answer. He knew it was over. At the Angels' compound, the mood was quiet, tired, but solid. Men and women sat in the main clubhouse, drinking water and soda, the adrenaline of the long day seeping away. Mark stood at the front. "We did what we came to do," he said, his voice echoing in the large room. "We voted. We made sure others could vote. The news is gonna talk. They'll call us heroes or thugs, doesn't matter. We are what we are. We go back to business tomorrow, but tonight we remember we're a family." A low murmur of agreement went through the room. They were not a soft group, but the pride was there, thick in the air. Across town, Daniel couldn't sleep. His eagle patch was on his nightstand. The house phone rang. His mom, Jennifer, answered. It was a reporter from a big New York newspaper. Jennifer politely said no comment and hung up. She looked at Daniel's door, her face a mix of worry and awe. The next morning, the world had found Pine Creek. News vans were camped outside the school, the county building, the Maple Ridge Park. Daniel's teacher, Mr. Davies, turned his civics class into a real-time lesson. "What happened yesterday," he said, "is a textbook case of civil engagement meeting unconventional enforcement. Let's discuss the legalities, the ethics, the outcomes." Daniel kept his head down, but kids kept looking at him. At the county building, Chief Donnelly had a state investigator in his office. The investigator had cold eyes. "The chain, Chief, who placed it?" Donnelly sweated. "Commissioner Griffin's office, they said it was a property line issue." It was voter suppression, a felony, you knew it. You did nothing. Then you tried to arrest a child for fixing your mistake." The investigator closed his notebook. "Your resignation on my desk by noon, or we arrest you too." Griffin was already packing his office. The recall petitions were being signed outside his door. His political career was finished in a single day. The power he tried to steal had blown back on him hard. Meanwhile, James was staring at his phone. He had texted Rita good morning. She wrote back immediately. They texted all day, simple things, what they were eating, what music they liked. That evening he called her. They talked for 2 hours. He told her about growing up in the club, about his mom Mercy, about wanting to be more than just the patch. She told him about being a teacher, about her dreams. It was easy, it was real. A week later, the first real threat emerged. It wasn't from the police or politicians. It was from the Vandals, a rival motorcycle club from the next state. They saw the news. They saw the Angels standing in a peaceful line. To them, it looked soft, weak, an opportunity. A Vandal prospect was caught on the outskirts of the Angels' territory, spray painting over their murals. He was sent back to his president with a broken arm and a message: "Stay away." But the Vandals didn't listen. Their president, a vicious man called Crank, saw a chance to gain respect. If the Angels were playing citizen, they weren't watching their streets. He planned a move on one of the Angels' smaller legal businesses, a custom bike shop on the county line. Mark got the word from his network. He called a meeting. "The vandals think we've gone soft," he told his officers. "They think voting means we've forgotten how to fight. We need to remind them." Paul cracked his knuckles. "Let's go burn their clubhouse down." "No," Mark said. "That's old. That's what they expect. We hit them smarter. We hit them where it hurts, their money." The Angels had files. They knew things. They knew about the vandals' dirty deals, their hidden stashes, their connections to a trucking company that was moving more than furniture. Mark called his lawyer, David. "It's time to be a good citizen again," Mark said. "We need to report a crime." David smiled on the other end. "Anonymously, I assume." "Very." The next day, a detailed, anonymous tip went to the federal DEA and the state police. It had dates, times, license plate numbers, warehouse addresses. It was all about the vandals' drug operation. 3 nights later, while Crank and his top men were planning their raid on the bike shop, the real raid happened. Federal agents and state troopers swarmed the vandals' clubhouse and 3 warehouses. They found guns, drugs, and stolen goods. Crank and a dozen of his men were arrested on federal charges. The vandals were shattered in one night. The message was received loud and clear across the outlaw world. The Angels hadn't gone soft. They had just gotten smarter. They could stand in a voting line one day and dismantle you with a phone call the next. Their empire was not just intact, it was stronger. A month after the vote, the town held a small fall festival. James asked Rita to go with him. He didn't take his bike. They walked. He held her hand. It was simple and perfect. They rode the Ferris wheel, and at the top, with the whole lit-up town below them, he kissed her. It was gentle but full of promise. The chemistry between them was a live wire, a sweet, adult tension that made her laugh nervously and him feel steadier than he ever had on his bike. "I'm not a safe guy to be with, Rita," he said quietly as they walked past the game booths. "I know what you are, James," she said, squeezing his hand. "I saw what you are. You stood in line for 10 hours so an old man could vote. You protect your people. That's the man I'm with." Daniel was at the festival with his mom. He saw James and Rita. He saw Mark, who was there with a woman named Elena, a strong, quiet woman who ran an auto parts store. They looked like regular people, but Daniel knew better. He walked up to Mark. "Hey kid," Mark said. "Hi," Daniel said. He shuffled his feet. "School, doing a whole thing on the Pine Creek stand. I have to give a speech." "You'll be great," Mark said. Will you ever do it again?" Daniel asked. Mark looked out at the happy, normal crowd, the festival lights reflected in his eyes. "The vote, yeah, every time, but the show," he shook his head. "That was a one-time thing. We made our point. Now we go back to being us, in the shadows mostly, but watching." The national media had moved on to the next story, but the legacy remained. Voter registration in Pine Creek County had doubled. People weren't afraid anymore. The club's chosen candidate, a pragmatic woman named Stella, was now in office. She didn't do the Angels' bidding. That wasn't the deal. The deal was fairness. She cleaned up the county contracts, fired the corrupt workers, and left the club's legal businesses alone. It was an understanding, a respectful distance. Winter came. James and Rita were inseparable. He spent Christmas with her family, feeling awkward but welcomed. She met his mom, Mercy, and the 2 women liked each other immediately. The club was his family, but Rita was becoming his future. One night in Rita's small apartment, the room was dark except for the streetlights outside. They were on her couch, wrapped in a blanket. The conversation had faded into comfortable silence. He traced a finger along her jawline down her neck. She shivered, turning to face him. Their kisses deepened, slow and explorative. His hands, rough from working on engines, were surprisingly gentle as they moved under her sweater, resting on the warm skin of her back. Her fingers tangled in his hair. The air was thick with desire, a slow, burning 18+ heat that was palpable but controlled. It was charged, intimate, and full of love. He pulled back, breathing hard, resting his forehead against hers. "We should stop," he whispered, his voice husky. "I know," she whispered back, but she didn't let go. They stayed like that, holding each other, the promise of more hanging between them, sweet and certain. Spring returned. A year had passed. Daniel was about to graduate elementary school. He was asked to speak at the ceremony. He was nervous. In the crowd, he saw his parents, his teacher, Mr. Davies. And in the very back, leaning against the wall, were Mark and James. They wore simple leather jackets, no cuts. They just gave him a small nod. Daniel took a deep breath. He talked about civics. He talked about right and wrong. He didn't mention the chain or the bikers by name. He didn't have to. Everyone knew the story. "My teacher said the vote is sacred," Daniel said, his voice clear in the quiet auditorium. "But I learned it's also powerful. And sometimes power doesn't look like you think it will. Sometimes it's very quiet. And sometimes it's really, really loud." The audience erupted in applause. Mark, in the back, just smiled. After the ceremony, Mark handed Daniel a small wrapped box. Graduation gift. Daniel opened it. Inside was a polished steel bolt cutter keychain. On it was engraved one word: first. "You were the first Link kid," Mark said. "Never forget that." Daniel held the keychain tight. He understood. That summer, James proposed to Rita by the lake. He got down on one knee, no bike in sight, just him, scared and hopeful. She said yes, crying happy tears. The club threw them a huge, raucous wedding reception at the compound. Music played, bikes were polished, and for one night, the Empire celebrated love. Daniel and his family were invited. He danced with his mom, ate barbecue, and watched as James, in his full cut now, danced with his new wife. Rita looked at James like he was her whole world. He looked at her like she was his peace. Mark stood with Alina, watching. His empire was secure. Their businesses were good. Their reputation was stronger than ever, feared and respected, in the shadows and when it counted, in the light. They had defended their own without firing a shot. They had used the system to crush a rival, and one of their own had found a happiness that wasn't about the patch. It was a balance. The paradox remained. They were outlaws who had become the unexpected guardians of a democratic process. They used intimidation to ensure peace. They were a family bound by lawless codes who valued the law of the vote. As the party wound down, Mark looked out at the stars. Alina slipped her hand into his. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That it's a strange world," he said. "An 11-year-old boy cuts a chain, and 1,000 outlaws remember what it means to be a citizen." He squeezed her hand. "We didn't change who we are, we just showed them one more piece of it." And in Pine Creek, life moved on. The legend of the stand was told and retold. It became a part of the town's history, but for those who lived it, it was just a chapter. The club went back to its business, its rides, its private life. James built a life with Rita, a life that spanned 2 worlds. Daniel grew up, the keychain always on his backpack, a reminder that one small, brave act can change everything. The vote the next year was quiet. No chains, no 1,000 bikes, just people lining up peacefully, but everyone in Pine Creek felt the unseen presence. The quiet assurance that their right was protected by the most unlikely guardians imaginable. The empire hadn't fallen. It had just learned a new way to hold its ground. The echo of the wedding party faded, but the new chapter for the Pine Creek Charter was just beginning. James and Rita moved into a small house on the edge of town, a compromise between his world and hers. His bike was in the garage, but his cut stayed on a hook by the door most days. He started working more at the legitimate bike shop, his talent with engines turning into a steady, legal income. Rita's family slowly got used to him, seeing the quiet, devoted man beneath the tattoos. But the club life never fully lets go. One evening, Mark called James to the compound. The atmosphere was serious. A problem had surfaced from an unexpected direction, not a rival club, but a real estate developer from the city. The developer, a slick man named Carter, had bought up large tracts of land near Maple Ridge. His plan was to build a sprawling, gated community. The problem? The only road access was through the old logging road, the voting road. And Carter's plans showed him annexing and closing that road for security reasons, which would cut off Maple Ridge entirely. "He's got money, political connections, and he doesn't care about the people up there," Mark said, pointing at a map. "He thinks we're just a story. He thinks we won't fight for a road." Mercy, James's mom, was at the meeting. Her eyes were blazing. "He wants to put a gate where Daniel cut that chain. He wants to lock us out of our own homes, over my dead body. It's not a fight we can win with muscle, David, the lawyer, said calmly. "This is zoning, county councils, environmental impact reports. It's a paper war." Mark nodded. "So we fight a paper war, but we remind him what's behind the paper." He looked at James. "You're the bridge now, James. You live in both worlds. You talk to the people on the ridge, organize them, form a proper homeowners association. We'll fund it. David will guide it. We'll fight this clean, legal, and loud." James felt the weight of it. This was a different kind of duty. He spent days going door to door in Maple Ridge, helping the residents, many elderly, many just scraping by, fill out forms, understand their rights. Rita helped, using her teacher skills to explain the legal jargon. Daniel, now 12, tagged along, handing out flyers he'd designed on his computer. They took their case to the County Planning Commission. The hearing room was packed. Carter and his team of suits presented glossy renderings of golf courses and swimming pools. They talked about progress and tax revenue. Then James stood up. He wasn't in his cut. He wore a simple button-down shirt, the sleeves rolled up to show his tattoos. He spoke quietly, clearly. He introduced Mercy, who talked about her home of 40 years. He introduced Mr. Henderson, who described being chained out. He showed photos of the community. He wasn't threatening, he was just present, a solid, immovable fact. Carter smirked. "This is sentimental nonsense. The greater good demands progress." Then a new voice spoke. "Define the greater good, Mr. Carter." Everyone turned. Standing at the back of the room were Mark, Paul, and 5 other club members. They were in clean jeans and leather jackets, not their cuts. They weren't disrupting, they were just watching. Their presence filled the room like a low hum. Carter's smirk faded. He'd seen the news footage. He knew who they were. The silent observation was more powerful than any shout. The Planning Commission, feeling the heat of public sentiment and that unmistakable, silent pressure, voted to delay the decision, demanding a new traffic study from Carter. It was a small victory, but it was time. Afterwards, outside, Carter approached Mark, trying to sound tough. "You can't intimidate me with your little show." Mark looked at him, his eyes cold. "That wasn't a show, Mr. Carter. That was a community meeting. You're not fighting bikers. You're fighting grandmothers and veterans and kids, and we help our community. Walk away. Build your gates somewhere else." The threat wasn't in the words. It was in the absolute certainty behind them. Carter, a man used to buying his way through problems, saw something he couldn't buy. He left shaken. The fight would drag on for months, but the tide had turned. Amidst this, the relationship between James and Rita deepened into a true partnership. One night, after a long planning meeting, they were in their kitchen. Rita was stressed, rubbing her temples. James came up behind her, his strong hands gently massaging her shoulders. She leaned back into him with a sigh. The touch started practical but slowly changed. His lips brushed the side of her neck. She turned in his arms, and the kiss was hungry, a release of the day's tension. It was charged, full of adult need and deep affection. He picked her up, her legs wrapping around his waist, and carried her to the bedroom, their laughter fading into breathless silence. Later, lying tangled in the sheets, she traced the wings of the tattoo on his back. "We're going to win this, aren't we?" she whispered. "Yeah," he said, kissing her forehead. "We are." Daniel, inspired, started a real civics club at his middle school. They wrote letters to the editor, organized a cleanup of the logging road, and even invited David the lawyer to talk about property rights. Daniel became a quiet leader, the boy who had started a legend, now fostering smaller, everyday acts of courage. The final showdown with Carter came at the County Board of Supervisors meeting. Carter had pulled in favors, and his revised proposal was on the agenda for a final vote. The room was again packed. Carter had hired private security, who eyed the crowd nervously. The Maple Ridge residents spoke again, more organized this time. James presented a petition with thousands of signatures. Daniel spoke, his voice now stronger. "You can't gate off people's lives for a profit," he said simply. The supervisors seemed unmoved, swayed by Carter's promises of jobs and money. Then Mark stood. He hadn't planned to speak. He walked to the front. He didn't look at the board, he looked at Carter. "A year ago," Mark said, his voice gravelly and quiet, "a chain went up on that road. It was a cheap, cowardly trick to steal people's voices. A child cut it down, and 1,000 people you probably fear stood in the sun all day to make sure the voices were heard. He finally turned to the board. That road isn't just dirt and gravel, it's a symbol now. You vote to close it, you're not just approving a development, you're saying that chain was right. You're spitting on what this county decided last election, and we will remember that, at the ballot box, in court, every day. It wasn't a threat of violence. It was a promise of relentless, legal, political opposition. The supervisors looked at the resolute faces of the Maple Ridge residents, at the unwavering presence of the club members in the back, at the TV cameras. They saw a no-win situation. The vote was called. It was a tie. The final vote belonged to the board president, Stella, the woman the club had helped elect. She looked at Mark, at James, at Daniel, at old Mr. Henderson. "I vote no," she said firmly. "The road stays open. The proposal is denied." The room erupted. Carter stormed out, his project dead. The celebration that night was at the Maple Ridge Community Hall. It was a potluck, full of laughing families. The Hells Angels were there, blending in, accepting plates of food, dancing with grandmothers. Daniel showed Mark his civics club project. James held Rita close on the dance floor, her head on his shoulder, both of them swaying to an old country song. Mark watched it all with Alina by his side. They had won, not with fists or threats, but with unity, strategy, and the sheer, stubborn power of claiming their place. The Empire had defended its territory once more, not by expanding its shadows, but by protecting the light where its people lived. As the night ended, Mark stood outside, looking at the stars again. James joined him. "We did it the way you wanted," James said. "Claim." Mark put a hand on his shoulder. "You led it. You're the future, James. A future where we're not just in the background feared. We are part of the community we protect. That's a stronger empire than any built on fear alone." Years would pass. Daniel would graduate high school and go to college to study law. James and Rita would have 2 children. The club would continue its businesses, its rides, its private ways. The story of the stand would become local folklore, told to newcomers over coffee. And every election day, without fail, the voters of Maple Ridge would go to the polls. And often, standing quietly in line with them, would be a few familiar, large, tattooed men in leather vests. They wouldn't be 1,000 strong. They didn't need to be. Their presence was a quiet reminder, a promise kept. They were citizens, they were outlaws, they were a family, and they were home. Thank you for watching. Can a single act of defiance really change an entire town? What would you have done if you saw that chain? Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Could this story happen where you live?